All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Mike, where are we?
We are at the Minneapolis Republican Hall slash office slash treehouse.
Oh, there we go.
I like to be creative with the names. So no, it's Minneapolis Republican Hall, um, which is the headquarters right now
Yep.
of the Minneapolis GOP.
Awesome.
So, and if you need to get a hold of them, mplsgop.org. Give them a
Awesome.
shout out and thank you for opening up your facility to us. I think it's great.
Yep.
What they've done here is phenomenal. This is those inroads that we need to get
Yep.
to help win the metro. And we're sitting down with. Introduce yourself, Todd.
Yeah.
My name's Todd Hesemann, and I am the Republican endorsed candidate for 43A in Minnesota, and that is New Hope and most of Crystal.
And who is the sitting representative there now?
Cedric Frazier is.
Okay. So that district tends to lead pretty blue, correct?
Yeah, for the last 30 years or so, it's tended to be about 60% Democrat and 40% Republican in the general election vote.
Well, I think we can move the needle this time.
Yeah. That's why we're here today, right?
That's right. We've got a good
Moving the
candidate
needle.
here. That's right. That we can't make change and we can't win the state back without making some inroads. And I think it's great that you're running. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. Retired, not retired, but ex-police.
No, I'm actually a software engineer,
Okay.
still working for Oracle, and but I've been a volunteer, a police reserve officer for 17 years for the city of New Hope, and I grew up on a farm, so I kind of feel a little bit of a kindred spirit with all the rural people, but I haven't actually lived on a farm since I graduated from college, so I'm kind of metroized, I guess you'd call it.
We won't hold that against you.
Okay, thanks.
So where did you grow up? Which part of the state?
I grew up on a farm between Lakefield and Worthington,
Oh,
not too far from Interstate 90.
down south.
Yes.
Yeah, down south.
Yeah, we're up north.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where Drew and I are from. But no, it's tell me a little bit about the police work that you've done because we see an increase in crime across the state of Minnesota. We heard a rather staggering number just not too long ago, 9,700 cars or people that were given a pass with stealing cars just in Hennepin County over the course of a year. So tell me about how the police have been treated in our state.
Well, obviously in Minneapolis and a few other cities, there's been a very anti-police uh, favor. You know, that people are wanting to hold police in account. And I think Cedric Frazier is a little bit of a symptom of that. I don't think he's the worst by any means, but he's had a little bit of that flavor of, hey, let's make sure that police are held accountable for all the things that they do. And I get that. I get that you want bad police officers to be held to account, but it's really poisoned the atmosphere for the police in certain cities. It's not true everywhere. I think New Hope and Crystal, the relations between the police and the citizenry is still really good. And New Hope and Crystal have excellent police departments.
Well, I think part of the problem actually is social media because you'll get this viral clip of a cop, like, maybe putting his knee on the guy's back, holding him down. And all of a sudden it becomes the court of public opinion on Twitter and on Facebook. And then you get the people who maybe hate cops because they've had bad experiences. They'll shout and they'll scream and throw their little tantrum, not trying to downplay it because if you have a bad experience, you have a bad experience. But when you start sharing that all so much, you get a negative view on these cops. So if it even looks like they screw up, they can get drugged through the mud.
Yeah.
Well, sure, we've seen that negative in the impact. So this even affects like up in our area.
Mm-hmm.
Alexandria Technical College has a police class, to train police coming in, and their enrollment is virtually been cut in half.
Yeah.
So fewer and fewer people are getting into that line of work, which they're in effect, and I'm sure we'll have the number here someplace where we're thousands short on police across the state, which ties into the crime that we're seeing more and more of.
the other thing that I'm hearing, obviously I'm not a sworn officer or anything, but I hear that it's difficult for metro area police departments to get police officers. You know, if you go to a law enforcement job fair, you find a good prospect, you start telling them, yeah, we have a great police department, and some of them are really good police departments, and then they hear that you're in Hennepin County, and they don't want to come
Sure.
because and it's largely because of Mary Moriarty and others like her that um, will not prosecute, car theft or youth, juveniles are not held to account, and so we have a little bit of an escalating problem here.
What does the juvenile crime look like in your area?
Well, it's pretty well known that there's a lot of juveniles doing car theft and carjacking, and they pretty much, if they don't kill somebody, pretty much just get let go when they get caught. And so you have the same small set of juveniles who continue to steal cars and not held to account. And I don't think that's going to change. I don't think she believes in prosecuting anybody under
So,
24.
so they don't even get community service.
I don't know. Not immediately. They might get that later, but I doubt that they serve it.
You know, Mike, I think we grew up in the wrong area because I couldn't be wild when growing up in small town Minnesota. I would have been in trouble. I would have at least had community service. I mean, granted, I was a good boy. Don't worry. But
I can relate a story because times have changed a little bit. Um, but I remember one time having a talk with a police officer, and he said, "Where are you going right now?" And I said, "I guess I'm going home." And he said, "And you're going to tell your parents, right?" And I said, "Yeah," thinking, okay, I might get out of this, right? And he goes, "Because I'll see your dad in the morning. We have coffee every day together." Okay. So I couldn't get out of it. And that's the way it worked, though. I mean, the
yeah,
police worked with the parents as well and said, and this is rural area, of course, but there was a respect both ways for the officers and for the parents. And that officer knew I was going to have a lot worse punishment by my folks than he could ever give me.
right.
But so let's get on to another subject. We talked about a little bit about crime, but in your Facebook page or your website and stuff, you have something that's near and dear to my heart, and that's this, depending upon how you look at it, 18, 19 and a half billion dollar surplus that was, tell us in your own words. Tell us about that.
Well, everyone knows. There are a lot of people that don't pay much attention to what's going on politically, but everyone, I think, has heard that there was a huge surplus last year, and they were promised something like, depending on who you talk to, when $2,000 return on that big surplus, and it ended up being, for those who were lucky, getting 200 some dollars back, and it depends on whether the taxes were paid on it or not. So it was very disappointing to everyone, and seems to be a near universal disappointment, at least, and in many cases anger that the government can't return such a huge surplus. And still nobody knows what we got for that huge surplus. I was on a call this morning with a bunch of candidates, and the candidates were asking, "Does anybody know where this money went?" And apparently, some people have some idea, but we really don't know, and that's disappointing. We don't know if it were just setting up some more grifting opportunities, or if we actually got some improved services or some capital expenditures. Nobody knows for sure.
So I'll give you some of the things, and you've probably heard where some of the money went to. There was education. Got a big chunk of money. Now, our education in the state of Minnesota, our test scores and so forth, have declined precipitously
Yep.
under the Walz administration. So we have stuck more and more money into education, and especially after this last cycle. But what do we see happening across the state of Minnesota? And maybe it's not in your school districts, but we have teachers who are striking because the money never made it to the teachers. The money that got spent in education ends up going through MD&E. It's going into more regulations. It's going into more of the growth of government, more of the bureaucracy. and it never made it to the teachers.
Yep, it's
So it kind of tells you the priorities of what's happening here. And we've seen that money getting wasted, feeding our futures.
yep.
And what was the recent?
Wasn't there a fraud in that? And during the fraud case in Feeding Our Future, didn't a juror actually receive a bag of money?
$120,000.
Like in an actual bag.
Yep, brown bag. So there's some of the money that surplus that got
Yeah.
spent that never even made it to the schools. School districts across the state of Minnesota are saying, you gave us more money for education, but at the same time, there is so much more regulations that they're going to be backwards. They're not going to be able to give teachers an increase in pay. And because of the mandates, they're going to end up having to raise taxes
Yeah.
for the citizens to cover the mandates.
So it sounds to me like we have a bureau in Minnesota that's just soaking up a bunch of taxpayer funds and not really doing anything with it.
So that's just one of the things. The other thing that I'll say that money went to is the growth, not just in education, but I believe by the numbers, the state of Minnesota became the largest employer
Yep,
in the state of Minnesota.
that is true.
So when the government becomes the biggest employer in the state, that's a top heavy organization or structure. Show me any business that is top heavy that's successful. It does not work. Those businesses will go bankrupt in a short amount of time. So we're going to go from that $18-19 billion surplus plus another 10 billion. I'm stealing your thunder a little bit. I apologize, Todd. 10 billion more in taxes and a projected deficit in a year or two of 2 to 3 billion already. The taxpayers in this state should be outraged. And I hope you bring that message back to your district. And it sounds like you are. Thank you for that being one of your issues. So, anything more on the surplus? What is there a better way to have spent that, or how would you have dealt with it?
Well, yeah, I would like to have seen money returned, or decades ago we had this crazy idea of a rainy day fund, and there seemed to be bipartisan agreement that, hey, let's prepare for hard times. Let's put away a few $1 billion to be tapped later when we really need it, and that doesn't appear to have been even a consideration this time. I think that would have been acceptable, as a way to at least have a little bit of wisdom with how we're handling it. But instead, what we've set up was grown government, which of course means that there's a lot more people out there making a lot more rules and a lot more regulations for the rest of us to follow. I think that leads to decreased liberty and probably ultimately more taxes.
Well, our governor is openly socialist. And was it neighborliness? Was it?
One person's socialism is another person's
Yeah.
neighbor.
But instead of going over to your neighbor for a cup of sugar, you're coming with a warrant to send him to the gulag.
Well, if that's his neighborly, or if socialism is neighborliness, I would rather have less neighborliness.
Yeah.
If that's the case. So we talked about the police a little bit. We talked about the money. Any other hot button issues that you would like to discuss that really affect the people in your area? What connects with it? Obviously, the money is huge with an economic, constraints that we're
Right.
seeing with the inflation. What else do you see?
Well, the one thing that I've really been pushing is something that people don't know about, unless you're a political junkie like me, is how the session ended with House File 5247, where the Democrats, as near as I understand, and I wasn't there, but as near as I understand, the Democrats had so many things they wanted to pass, and they just weren't getting them done. So in the last day, they combined everything that was left into one huge jumbo omnibus bill of 1,430 pages and rammed it through without seeing it or debating it. And that people don't, I think some people don't believe me when I tell them that happened. But
Hey,
secondly,
you were there.
Actually, I wasn't.
Oh yeah, you weren't. 'Cause that was the last day.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead. Finish your statements, Todd.
so this bothered me so much. I downloaded the bill. I looked through it. I printed it out, and double-sided. It's 5 pages thick. And I hauled it around a national night out and went to various street parties and said, "This is what your legislature passed on the last 90 minutes of the legislative session this year, without ever looking at it. And I was challenged, and I said, yes, they were familiar with some parts of it because things had been through committee or whatever. But there was nobody except a few staffers who saw that whole bill, and it was impossible to read it from the time it came out until they voted on it. Matter of fact, it was probably nearly impossible to even read through the title, which was over 5 pages long.
5 pages.
And believe you me, the title is indecipherable. They threw so much junk in there that you cannot possibly understand what's all in there.
Yep. And the title is 5 pages because in Minnesota, the bill has to correlate somehow into the title, correct?
So the state constitution says that it has to be single line item bills with the title in the description. So that's why it got rolled into the tax bill. So some inside information of what happens there is those bills go to committee and the House and the Senate have to agree on what's going on into that bill, right? But because the Democrats control the House and the Senate, they decide what's going into that bill. So some of the stuff that was approved in the House may not have been approved in the Senate or vice versa. Meaning that when people in the House got this bill to vote on it, there are parts of it they probably had never seen. Okay? And it is unconstitutional. I cannot stress that enough. It is unconstitutional in our state.
Wait, so you're telling me that bill is void?
I would think it should be. It should have been shredded that day. But you had made a comment earlier, and I'll clarify this.
Oh, yeah.
Some more of the inside baseball that's going on in politics. So the Democrats controlled the schedule.
Yep.
Right? The last week of session, we had floor session on Monday.
Yep.
We had nothing on Tuesday. We had floor session on Wednesday, which at the end of Wednesday, we were, Melissa Hartman, the Speaker of the House, gavelled us out at the end at midnight, basically, because we had supposedly filibustered, which, not true. We wanted to thoroughly discuss these bills. Thursday, we had no floor session again. And then we had session Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Yep.
Now, for myself, as a Christian, as a Catholic, I believe that Sunday is the Lord's Day. Okay? And typically what's been done is we've been given time to go to church on Sunday mornings. We discussed the ERA bill from Saturday night till 5 o'clock Sunday morning. I shouldn't say discussed it. It's a horrible bill. Should have been shredded as soon as they came up with the idea. At 5 o'clock when we gavelled out, they said, we're going to gavel back in at 9 o'clock Sunday morning. And I said, we're not going to have time to go to church. Because they would normally not start session until noon, 1, 2 o'clock. They trampled on our religious freedoms. We took time off for Ramadan. We took time off for Passover. We did have Good Friday as Christians. But that Sunday, when they would not even give us time to go to church, I was irate.
Yeah.
We did the podcast that day, and I said, I will not go back into session when they trample on our religious freedoms in this state. And that's the Democrats that did this.
Yeah.
I will not do that.
Yeah, and that's actually important to emphasize. The Democrats are pro-religious freedoms for the ones that they agree with. And I've been seeing this for years. I don't know if you've seen this pattern, but Christianity has been being wrung through the mud, just like through like Hollywood and through these politics. You have anything on that, Todd? just to bring you in, sorry.
Yeah. So
I got off on a rant. I apologize.
Yeah, we're dragging you into it.
I wasn't aware of all the religious overtones of the passage of that bill, but what occurred to me was if all of these Democrats were voting for this bill, essentially sight unseen, then who are they representing? Are they representing their constituents by voting on something they haven't seen and don't allow any debate on it, or are they just representing their leadership in St. Paul? And I think every single one of them would have to say, no, I do what the leadership in St. Paul tells me. And that's why I'm running, is to try to hold Cedric Frazier and these other representatives and senators accountable for the fact that they're not paying any attention to what their citizens want, or they would have had to have read this bill, and they would have had to have vetted all of those terms that are in there.
I think the point you made there is very insightful. we saw this on the floor, and I can use this to verify, when we were discussing bills on the floor, to see the other side of the aisle where half of the members are gone, or more sometimes. So we're discussing bills, and half of the other side is not even listening, and they're not even on the floor.
So
That is a scary thing, and this is something that the people out in your area should know. So where's your representative in those areas? So we have just a little bit of time left. Any other topics that you wanted to hit before we go?
Well, I was just going to mention about, I guess, a little bit about my campaign strategy. I know that everyone talks about going door knocking, and I have an example of someone who previously ran in our district, and he did door knocking a lot, and he ended up moving the needle 3 points. So he lost, 43 to 57 instead of 40 to 60. And so I kind of know how much door knocking will do, and it's not enough. And so I think really what we need to do is get the Republicans out to vote. We live in a metro area where Republicans are dispirited, and they feel like they can't win. And so I think probably 30 to 40% of those that are Republican leaning, at least, aren't getting out to vote, which is why I'm really trying to pursue a ballot chasing initiative where we will call and pester, if we have to, people that we know that are on our side. Make sure that they cast a vote. I think we can make up 10 to 15 points by doing that.
yeah. And the thing is, and Mike says this all the time, is that Republicans can outvote the Democrats. It's possible. We have the stats. We don't need to go into them in depth, but it's true. And the thing is, if you're not going to go vote, what's the point even paying attention to politics? Just keep your head down and do what you're told. But if you want to live free and you want to live with like morals and justice, like there's some effort that needs to be done, right?
There's a responsibility.
There is
There's
responsibility.
a duty.
It's like Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility.
I was thinking more like founding fathers, but we can do
Well, I mean,
Spider-Man.
who was inspired by whom? Let's be real.
Man? Okay.
Yeah, so I was just thinking that it's hard to convince people to your side. It can be done, but it's hard and it takes
effort.
time. It's not very hard to get the people that agree with you to get to the ballot place and vote. It takes a little bit of effort, but a lot less. You just have to call them and remind them and get them to promise to go.
Right.
I think we can make up a lot of our deficit by an initiative like that.
I think that's a great point, and I also believe in that positive attitude. I really do. I think we can flip this state, and we need to work together. We need to hold a positive attitude. People say, how's it going? Any day above ground is good.
Yep.
We have a chance. We can flip the state, and I think that, chasing the ballots, that, driving people to the polls, the Democrats do a great job of it. We don't. So with that, I guess we'll wrap this up. Once again, we're at the Minneapolis Republican Hall office treehouse. And look up mplsgop.org and take a look, because what's going on down here in Minneapolis is absolutely amazing. This is the start of that. That's the spearhead that's going to help change the state back to being a conservative state. So I'm Mike Weiner, with us candidate for House Representative 43A Todd Hesemann and Drew Peterson, and signing off. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.